All right. Hope everyone is doing well since our last episode. Today, we're going to chat a bit about AmplifyX and some of the work they're doing towards redefining ownership in the music industry. As always, I'm William McKenzie of Tezos Commons, joined with Marissa True of TZ APAC as your host. Marissa, how's your morning?
It is not too shabby. I really enjoyed this morning's pre-episode discussion about various diet plans and what makes you happy versus
Definitely.
not. But it's fortunately not what we're here for today. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest, who is Adam Cowherd. He's the CEO of AmplifyX. So, hello, Adam.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So, like Will said, we're here to discuss what your business does, what its mission is. So can you give us a quick introduction to what the mission of AmplifyX is?
Absolutely. So the mission of AmplifyX is to build the toolkit for the creator economy. So the first two tools that we've really built is for specifically musicians around a capital marketplace, where basically we allow musicians to do mini IPOs, where their fans can invest directly into them. And then the other product that we've done is around monetization through NFTs. And we're really interested about the intersection of securities, IP rights, and other utility mechanisms to deepen those fan to musician connections with the NFTs and the technology that it allows.
So how exactly does the platform work?
So today there's actually two platforms. There's the Amplify crowdfunding platform, and then there's the Amplify NFT marketplace. So depending on what services a musician that we work with wants to do, we onboard them to that specific platform. So for example, our first ever artist on the crowdfunding platform was an artist named Rocky Bad, and she wanted to raise around $10,000 in exchange for around 20% of the royalties of her next album that she sold directly to her fans. And what's cool about this is not only is she getting access to capital that she can use to record, produce, distribute, and promote this album, but she also is incentivizing her fans to become de facto ambassadors for that and for her project. Because people already send music to their friends when they find something that they enjoy. But imagine if they were actually invested into that musician. They'd be sharing it across social media, and it really just aligns the entire value chain and gives artists a much more fair deal versus traditional record contracts, which are the Amplify model on its head, where in a traditional record contract, just for the audience sake, typically an artist is going to give up 100% ownership of their intellectual property and copyright, which is known as the masters, as well as they're going to give up the lion's share of royalties, which is typically around 80%, and only take home that 20%. So Amplify, so we seek to flip that model completely on its head and also give the fans and of the musician upside in the music economy.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Maybe outside of Rocky Bad, can you kind of go a bit more in depth on how some of these musicians are starting to embrace NFTs to begin to gain better control over their careers and some of their work?
Absolutely. So actually about 2 weeks ago, we had our first NFT direct issuance drop with Junkie XL, who's the producer of everything from, or composer from everything from Mad Max to Batman versus Superman to Godzilla versus Kong and many other titles. And we had this really he had this really interesting idea to create a soundtrack to one fan's life and then auction that off as an NFT. And the result, and that's something that really has never been done before, because there's a lot of fans that have talked about this song is like the soundtrack to my life and talked about this, but he's literally going to actually create one of these soundtracks to someone's life. And the winning bidder ended up being a famous DJ named Don Diablo, which was pretty cool to see. And Don is actually talking about using the soundtrack in an upcoming NFT documentary that he's actually working on. So
That's actually
what we create is this platform that just allows musicians to express themselves in new ways and also monetize in new ways, where then they get to keep that additional revenue that they're creating through NFTs. And you can do this for utility. You can also do this just for new pieces of art. You could do it for different releases of limited edition songs and content. So we're super excited about what the future holds and think that we're just starting to scratch the surface.
Yeah, no, I think the news that you guys had teamed up with Tom Holkenborg or Junkie XL was massive, because I think, again, it was one of those instances of a very renowned musician getting involved in the blockchain space. And what I think is really fascinating about a platform like this is it really kind of binds together the fan community and the creators in a way that hasn't really been done before. But what I think is also unique in the approach is how it's almost applying kind of market and economic behaviors to how people engage with the creators that they're supporting, especially if you're considering it, like you said, like an IPO. I think it forces artists to rethink how they position themselves and how they brand their offering. So I guess the question I want to ask is, as this platform has launched and you're approaching different artists, different creators, what sort of demand have you actually seen since? And has it been difficult to explain the value of this kind of dynamic, or like NFTs or blockchain technology in general, towards musicians or just investors in general?
Definitely at the beginning. When we started talking about NFTs and the intersection of securities, IP rights, and these other utilities mechanisms, it was probably last fall. And since then, we've seen the NFT market just get lit on fire, where now my dad is asking me what an NFT is. So when it gets to that point, I think there is the understanding of, hey, this is NFTs in NFT 1.0, essentially, where NFTs is art. But then when we talk about what is the next evolution of NFTs with these utilities and just different experiences, people get really excited, and the musicians tend to actually have ideas for things that they want to do with their fans. And they've never really had a way to do it in a very efficient way that is trustworthy and has the transparency that blockchain technology brings to everything. And something I wanted to also call out is lots of the fans of these different musicians, they've never purchased cryptocurrency. They've never bought NFTs. They don't have MetaMask or Temple wallets that they can connect to go bid on these things. So something that we wanted to make sure that we had in our platform was we wanted to make the Web 3.0 experience feel like Web 2.0. So what I mean by that is I want the people to have a very familiar shopping cart like checkout process, where they could pay with a credit card, they could pay with a bank transfer, they could pay with different types of cryptocurrency via a Coinbase API integration. So we tried, even in our MVP, to include a lot of this to make it as frictionless as possible. And we actually ate all the gas fees. So there's no minting fees, there's nothing like that that you see on a lot of these other NFT marketplaces.
I think that's super interesting, because this is actually something I was discussing with a friend of mine yesterday, who is he's a visual artist and digital composer, and he was saying that whether consumers of the future, or actually current consumers for that matter, are focusing on the blockchain aspect of the experience at all, or whether they're just engaging with these platforms directly because it's as seamless as using the internet as they know it today. And I think that's definitely going to be an interesting way in terms of understanding how blockchain is going to go mainstream, and whether it's just going to be underlying technology that, people like us can discuss from the back end side of things, versus knowing how it actually plays into the user experience itself. Will, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we've been seeing a lot of, surge around NFTs, and specifically, within music. And I'm actually curious, outside of some of the different platforms that are springing up, maybe you can tell us, Adam, how AmplifyX kind of shines out in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's really about creating these unique digital experiences and having the true utility inside of the NFTs and taking it a step farther beyond just being digital artwork, as well as that very seamless buyer experience where it feels like Web 2.0. Because I know for a fact that a lot of my friends have heard a ton of and talked about NFTs a lot, but then very, very few actually have bought NFTs. And the easier you make that process and the more value that you can create from these NFTs, I think the more adoption you're going to get in this marketplace. So that's what we are really focused on, is how do we actually add meaningful value and create and take it a step farther from what these other marketplaces are doing, which is essentially selling JPEGs in some sense.
So then when it comes to musicians themselves picking the platforms, like what do you think are the deciding factors when it comes to selecting which to engage with?
Mm-hmm. I think the first one is going to be trust. Is it somebody that I understand what they're talking about when they speak with us, as well as have they done this before? Does my management know them? What do the economics look like? It's going to be a combination of these different types of things, but I think that trust is one of the most important in the music industry because it's a very relationship-based business. And it's sometimes good, sometimes bad. But the nice thing is, since we've entered the NFT business, we already are kind of known in a lot of circles in the music industry as the financial technology guys. So then they see this as an extension of our core business offering, which has been really interesting and very beneficial.
So then pulling away from the NFT aspect and going back to the more IPO quality of the platform of AmplifyX, like how exactly does a user who wants to support an artist engage? Like what do these launches look like? How does the artist communicate it in a way that both they and their fans will understand? I mean, does blockchain feature in the conversation at all, or is it something where they kind of play on the current hype of NFTs because it's something they can capitalize on for now, or how do they do this?
So right now, the two businesses are pretty separated, where one is an investment product and the other is in purchasing an NFT, which corresponds to some sort of experience typically.
Sure.
So
Sure.
when they're raising capital, we actually see these two businesses merging in the future because it makes sense that NFTs would hold a security in the future. Because when you think about how securities work in the US right now, let's just take Robinhood. When you place a trade on Robinhood, that trade gets sent to Citadel, who executes your trade order. Citadel then has a custodial shop that then has that trade settle and has custody of that specific equity. And that settles on a T+3. So you don't really own that stock until 3 days later, and you're owning it through another third party. Versus if you just put that security into an NFT and you said, I'll give you $20 worth of Tezos for this security, I could send that to you. We executed via smart contracts, and instantly that security is now in your possession. There's no custodial house. It's immutable. It's transparent via the blockchain. And I think that we're going to see this be a big trend in the future. And that's something that I was really excited about Tezos specifically, because they were starting to put securities and different types of IP rights onto their chain. So I saw there was a hotel chain, I want to say in Aspen, that did this. And they onboarded, I think it was a couple $100 million worth of securities and IP rights onto the Tezos blockchain and infrastructure.
Yeah, that was elevated returns, I believe.
So that's what I'm super excited about, because I think that players like Tezos that are already proof of stake, very energy efficient, very low gas fees, and have on-chain governance so they can fix the problems or make the chain better without doing these hard forks, I think that's why we decided to work with Tezos and build on Tezos, frankly.
It's a great pitch for us. Took the words right out of our mouths.
Because even when you think about something that I always struggled with is in the NFT space, for example, people sold the first 5,000 days piece for, what was it, $69 million. Let's say Ethereum hard forks, which it's already hard forked in the past. Now there's going to be 2 NFTs of people's first 5,000 days. Which one is the real one? Is it the Ethereum Classic version, or is it the just normal Ethereum version? And if you start putting securities onto this, you cannot have that, because you can't have 2 shares of a stock on 2 different blockchains that don't actually do anything together. So when you actually start thinking about not having on-chain governance, it's really difficult, and it actually becomes very dangerous in a lot of ways from a security standpoint, or IP rights, or anything that is really meaningful.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You know, like you were saying, you have the issue of network effects getting diminished and kind of creating these community splits, if you will. But pivoting back off Marissa's question, I'm curious how you see NFTs evolving from more than what we're seeing today, and kind of where you think we'll see them in the future, Adam.
So I see NFTs being corresponding to securities, IP rights, and other digital experience mechanisms. I think Gary Vee did some really interesting stuff with VeeFriends over the last couple of weeks, where, for those who aren't familiar, he sold an NFT that once a year you get to go sit courtside at a Knicks game with him. And that NFT sold for, I think it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you're buying access to somebody that otherwise most people would never be able to have access to. So I think those type of, even in real life experience, are going to be one big piece of NFTs. Like we've been talking about securities and IP rights, I think digital rights management on the blockchain, and so many different things. It's really, the sky is our limit. And NFTs are one of the first real commercial use cases for blockchain technology, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the commercial use for NFTs was one of the narratives that sort of just kind of got lost in the hype, because people saw things strictly as digital ownership. Like, I've purchased something online and therefore it's now mine, but they didn't really understand the applications that it could hold. And that it was primarily a vehicle to enable so many other things, which is why, like you said, we're only really seeing like the first generation of what it's capable of. And I think there's still a lot to be said about shifting people's mindsets beyond kind of NFTs within the art space versus the commercial space, and what it can enable. I like what you said about how it can kind of straddle between the digital or the blockchain realm and what it represents, and actually translate into something in the physical world. Because I think that's probably the mental leap that many are still yet to take. And so once we build that understanding, I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think it's definitely sort of the next frontier in terms of building that awareness of what exactly we're dealing with.
Exactly. And I think even in the authentication space. So for example, there's a big problem with Louis Vuitton, like fake purses or backpacks and belts. Imagine if you could add an RFID chip that to every single authentic Louis Vuitton that has a corresponding NFT that has all of the criteria of what this was, from the color to where it was made to the initial point of sale. And you could almost create authenticity trackers of these physical goods, and by connecting them with IoT technology. And I think you're going to start to see just really interesting use cases like that are going to take place, because authentication is a giant market. It's a multi-billion-dollar market per year. So when you could use something like the blockchain technology that has all this independent verification and can actually prove the authenticity, you're going to see a lot of really interesting things take place.
No, I think for sure. Will, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think more in a macro sense, it's kind of like the next metaverse, in a sense. And it's going to be interesting. Yeah, we've already seen some previous examples. I'm really kind of into gaming. There's a lot of stuff in the
Oh,
works on Tezos currently. I don't know if you're familiar with Emergence, but
yeah.
that's supposed to
I
be coming
actually,
out soon.
absolutely. I think what Emergence is doing, they've got the block party this weekend, actually.
Yeah,
I was talking
that's
to
right.
Brian yesterday, actually, about it. And I think that that is a perfect implementation because when you started first thinking about digital assets, Fortnite last year sold $2 billion worth of skins.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any actual material impact on your play, on the ability to play the game. All it is from like an optics perspective. So when you think about, imagine if NFTs actually corresponded to how you play a card game or something like that. It gets very, very interesting very, very quickly. And just that you have the traceability of the scarcity of these different cards, of the different assets in this digital realm, it's pretty exciting.
Definitely. I think things like AR, to
Mhm.
me are kind of like land grabs towards this potentially lucrative metaverse that we're witnessing being built. So it's going to be
Mhm.
interesting to see how things begin to change down the road.
Absolutely. I actually think I saw something on AR where you could get like AR NFT sneakers that you can actually then
Right.
onto people. I don't even know what application this was. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but I saw like something on Instagram today of this talking where it's showing like you can have virtual hats, you can have headphones, you can have masks, you can have anything. And then it just is really blending that physical and digital world like we were talking about earlier, which is really exciting.
Definitely.
I think what's also fascinating about it is that, I mean, we saw the rise of VR, and then we saw the rise of AR, and then now we're looking at the kind of the NFT experience and how the metaverse experience is becoming, it's evolving at such a pace that
Mhm.
now I think each of those technologies in and of themselves were impressive, but then people didn't really know how to engage with it in a way that was that meaningful. And now we're seeing the intersection between all of them and how they're all coming together to cultivate a very, frankly, a hybrid experience between digital life and real life. And I mean, that was something, frankly, that we grew up seeing in movies. It wasn't within the realm of possibility yet. And the fact that we're now at that point in time is, frankly, very impressive.
Absolutely. It's kind of like everything from Back to the Future minus maybe the hoverboard is kind of almost here. And I guess the phone booth and the DeLorean, but it's pretty cool to see because, like you said, we grew up watching these shows like that ended up showing things that are now taking place in reality. And I think something that's really interesting is Gen Z, how much they've embraced all of this because they were the first truly digital native generation where they grew up with iPhones and iPads in their hands. So they live and breathe technology. And I think technology is just an extension of themselves. Where I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Genies. They're an LA-based avatar startup, and they're getting into the metaverse about around selling digital goods, where I think one of their first clients was Gucci. And something that's so interesting is they have these avatars that if you can literally purchase a Gucci belt and then put it on your avatar, but then unless you purchase and own an NFT of that, you cannot use it. And then you can use this in messaging, you can use it in different games, you can use it in all these different places. So it's almost like creating status in the metaverse, which is a pretty crazy concept to think about. And think about even the new business models of fashion designers and game designers, where they could create their own custom lines that have never even been featured in the real world, but are only featured in these digital realms.
Yeah, I think fashion is a massive example because I've actually personally watched a couple of fashion shows where they did have a live component, but the entire thing was run by a green screen. But those who were watching it from an online perspective were seeing all kinds of scenery take place, and it just kind of changed the consumer experience altogether. But then one thing that's sort of been on my mind with regards to NFTs and the value that's created as a result of them, basically out of the scarcity, is, and also how Gen Z is probably the most ready to embrace the meaning of digital value versus, you know, seeing something as digital as rightfully free. It ponders the question a little bit of, I guess, how we're going to create social structures online, what that's going to look like on a very philosophical level, and whether in a weird way it's what we want versus using blockchain technology to sort of be the equalizer. I'm kind of in two minds about how that's playing out because, for example, like you said with the Gucci belt, you're driving status, and then I feel like on some levels blockchain was created to kind of enter a realm without that status and to have everyone on equal playing field.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because blockchain technology, specifically Bitcoin and Ethereum, lots of these super mega cap cryptocurrencies, they created more wealth than, like, this was the fastest wealth transfer we've ever seen in the history of the world, where people who were high schoolers were in the ICO of Ethereum at 30 cents, and then they watched it go to $4,000 this year over a 5-year period. And it's been pretty interesting because I've seen friends of mine who are my age, who are 30, retire because of Bitcoin or Ethereum and all these different cryptocurrencies. So when we talk about it being an equalizer, it is in a sense, but at the same time, even when you look at the NFT marketplace, there's about 200 crypto whales that are buying up all of these super high ticket items. So when you actually look at the transaction volume on a whole level versus just these top 200 accounts, these 200 accounts on many of the marketplaces are more than the other 99.9% of accounts in terms of transaction volume. So it's almost just creating a new ruling class where it's different, but it's interesting. It's a interesting philosophical question of, is it right, is it wrong? I have no idea. But
yeah, I think I don't think any of us are that equipped to answer it at a stage where it's still very much an emerging technology, right? So, but I do agree with you that it's essentially allowed people to enter at any floor. And that wasn't particularly the case. I mean, at least when it comes to traditional things like the stock market, you know, you can't just kind of enter the room and play. But then that sort of brought me into, I was having this discussion yesterday, and we veered off topic very slightly from AmplifyX, and we will circle back, so just bear with. But I think this is fascinating. How the gaming space in particular, which we did just raise, is changing the game for a lot of people, particularly with respect to the play to earn model. I don't know if you guys know of Axie Infinity. Have you heard of it?
I've heard the name. I've never played, or I'm not super familiar.
So Axie Infinity is actually a game similar to CryptoKitties in that people rear these NFT-based characters, and the more unique features they have, the more valuable the characters, and then they can earn tokens within the game that they can actually then translate into real money. And what's been impressive to see is that in the Philippines in particular, I think 50% of the daily active users come from the Philippines. People are actually playing this game as a means of earning their salaries because they are able to earn through a crypto game more than they would earn in their day jobs in a month. And so they're getting multiple generations, like grandparents right through to the grandkids, playing this game round the clock as a means of unlocking greater value. And it's fascinating in terms of what it's been capable of. So just seeing how that wealth creation we were talking about is happening in a very unique way that I don't think any of us would have predicted 10 years ago is something that I wonder what it's going to look like, you know, in 2 years, let alone 5 or 10.
Absolutely. That's super awesome. I've never actually heard of a model like that, but I think that's so great because it is really democratizing access and flattening the playing field, especially where it's not even you investing, it's how much work are you putting in. And then how much value then do you in turn create?
So then if we bring this back to AmplifyX and the music community in particular, when it comes to the artists who are, for lack of a better way of expressing it, having these IPOs for their music, what sort of, I guess, accountability mechanisms are there for the fans to ensure that, you know, whatever investment they put in, they're actually going to get something out of this artist they're supporting?
So we have a very strict vetting system where we make sure that the artist meets all of these different requirements in terms of listener growth, in terms of a sizable base of listeners, of specific social media followings, of they have to have a management team in place around them to make sure that when they raise the capital, it's going to be deployed effectively. And we're a FINRA and SEC regulated entity. So we make sure that we're doing everything above board. We run background checks on every musician. And even on the investor side, we do KYC checks, know your customer checks, to make sure that they're not on any embargoes or no-fly list, basically, to make sure that they're also, it's very clean money that's going onto the platform. So we have a lot of controls in place, especially because we are that FINRA and SEC registered member.
So this goes back to basically ensuring that all users have those almost familiar comforts to know that they can engage with things in a way that doesn't expose them to any risk, which I think is a very, very common a common factor when people decide to, quote, engage in any kind of blockchain experience.
Where, of course, there's still going to be risk, market risk in terms of individual, like musician performance risk, but we try to de-risk it as much as possible and just make sure that we're putting the best investment offerings that we can onto the platform, where we've had about 75 artists apply to be on a platform and only 3 have been approved and onboarded onto the platform so far.
That makes sense. Maybe going off on that, you can tell us some of the musicians or artists that you're personally fond of currently and supporting.
That's a great question. I think some of my favorite artists right now is going to be Aries, who's a Los Angeles-based musician. He's recently, I think he might have just signed with Sony, but another one is St. John, who's got that song Roses. I'm sure many people have heard him, but we met him back 3 years ago before he even had 100,000 monthly active listeners, which is pretty cool. And I actually ran into him a few weeks ago, and he remembers me and my business partner as those white boys who were talking business at a pop-up shop. So it's always pretty cool to see guys like that and just watch the emergence of them going from 50,000 monthly active listeners to 50 million. And what we're building with AmplifyX is how do you actually become a part of that journey, not only from a spectator viewpoint, but then also have that participation in that upside. Do you guys have any favorite artists you've been listening to lately?
I mean, not one that's particularly in the NFT realm. I actually started listening to this band called Black Pumas. I'm not sure if anyone's, but it's very much like R&B, soul, jazz. It's excellent. And I don't know how well known they are, but all I know is all of their music has been fantastic. So it's just been on repeat in my house.
I'll have to check them out.
Yeah, check out the song Color. That's a personal favorite.
I guess for myself, you know, it's not any up and coming artist, but I've been a big listener of Quincy Jones recently. I think he's involved in the launch of One Of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you guys had One Of on a podcast yet?
They're gonna be on end of this month.
Yeah.
Assuming all things go to plan. Yeah. But Will, I would have thought you said Doja Cat, but okay.
I mean, I've been listening to Doja Cat, but you know, it's just kind of once or twice.
Sure.
Not
Let's
frequent.
tell ourselves that.
Okay.
Will, I would not have guessed you to be a Doja Cat fan.
Well, I'm more of a Weeknd fan, and she did
Yeah.
a song with The Weeknd. So
Okay, that makes
yeah,
sense.
Don't need to defend yourself.
I,
You
th- I
can love
think The
Doja Cat.
Weeknd's actually working on a NFT as well, I believe.
Ah, interesting. I
Yeah,
think he's kind of made for that because even just the Super Bowl performance that he did, I think there were
Yep.
so many opportunities for that to be NFT, turned into an NFT, frankly.
I feel like if I had to predict what sort of artist or band would get involved into the NFT space or blockchain in particular, it would have always been all the guys from Gorillaz, just because they've been in the digital, like the digital representation space since what, the early 2000s, even before then, maybe.
probably
And like in terms of,
like early to mid 2010s, I'd say.
Mhm.
yeah, like the entire avatar concept in
Yeah.
the music industry was
Right.
spearheaded by them. So I feel like maybe you should hit them up. Let's see what they're up to.
Let's do it. We've actually been talking about doing some stuff in the metal bands because lots of them are so progressive in terms of what they do from not only a music standpoint, but then also from branding and style. Like, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with everyone like from Slipknot or Gore, and this like where they create these larger than life personas that nobody even knows who some of the people in the bands are. So I think things like that are really interesting, where they create this, and just I think that thing needs to go on and live in a digital space as well as the physical.
I think basically we're just at the beginning, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Well, Adam, this has been awesome talking to you, talking about the potential you see in the music industry all the way through to gaming, the metaverse and back again. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam.
All right.